Okay. Okay, let me just get to the share. There we go.
Now all my grandchildren want.
Okay.
I have 9 grandchildren.
All right. Good afternoon, everyone. To those who are here and to those who are online. We have a double Parsha again this week. We have Acharei Mos and Kedoshim. So Acharei Mos primarily deals with Yom Kippur, and Kedoshim is going to deal with other issues that come up in terms of what we can do to be a sanctified people. I want to share with you something fascinating. Well, we're going to see, hopefully it's going to revolve around 2 pieces that have to do with Acharei Mos today. The first piece is I find this to be fascinating. A couple weeks ago, Shabbos afternoon, we talked about how during this period of time, Sfiras HaOmer, and the time of the second Beis HaMikdash, there was a massive war which was raging between the Tzidukim, that's often translated as the Sadducees, and the standard rabbinic Judaism, and that had to do with when to start beginning the counting of the Omer. So, we talked about there was a literal reading of the Torah because the Torah doesn't give us a date; it just says Mimacharas HaShabbos, which means the day after Shabbos. Our Masorah, our tradition for that meant the day after the first day of Yom Tov, which would mean the first day of, remember there was only one day Yom Tov in the temple time, so it's the first day of Chol HaMoed Pesach. That's when we begin counting of the Omer. And then we know Shavuos is going to be 49 days later. The Tzidukim, the Sadducees, who took a literal reading, said, we don't buy into any Torah Shebaal Peh. We don't buy into this idea that you have something that's a tradition from Moshe. The Torah says, Mimacharas HaShabbos, so we take that to mean you start counting after the first Shabbos that occurs whenever Pesach did. So let's say this year, Pesach was started Saturday night. They wouldn't have started counting till the following Saturday night. So any Sadducees that are still out there, I don't think there are any, but if there were any still out there, basically their counting of the Omer would be a week behind ours, and as a result, Shavuos would be a week behind. So at the time of the Beis HaMikdash, the second Beis HaMikdash, towards the end, there was a huge rift between these various.
Different day every year?
Absolutely. There's only one time it could ever be the same, would be that if the first day of Pesach was Shabbos. That if the first day of Pesach was Shabbos, then Rabbinic Judaism and the Sadducees would all start counting the same Saturday night. But again, unless that happens, the Tzidukim were always going to start counting their Omer from the Saturday night after the first Shabbos that occurs after Pesach starts, and we start after the night ending the first night of Pesach. So this was a huge rift at the time of the second Beis HaMikdash, and we showed some Mishnayos that were in, I believe it was Maseches Menachos, which showed just how whenever it was that Rabbinic Judaism felt threatened by Sadducees, by anybody who was claiming to do away with Torah Shebaal Peh, not only did we stick to our guns, but we dug in our heels, and we even made it more of a celebration. We made it a bigger deal than it had been beforehand. So the Mishnah Menachos talked about this whole pomp and circumstance that went on with the cutting of the Omer, and how they would make a whole public display of it, and they would get everyone to start saying in unison, "Are you sure we should be cutting now?" And everyone would say yes, and they would say it 3 times. Should we cut it now? Yes, yes. Should I put it in this basket? Yes, yes. They would say it 3 times. Why? Because again, they wanted to create as much public fanfare that we have a Torah Shebaal Peh, we have a Masorah, and this was all this. And this is such a Jewish response to whenever we feel threatened, not only do we keep on going, but we dig in our heels and make it even a bigger deal than it was before. And there's other examples of that too. We talked about during Sukkot, there's this idea of Nisuch HaMayim, that there would be water libations on the Mizbeach. Again, in the Torah, that's not specifically mentioned. So the Tzedukim, they wouldn't do this. And whenever they took control of the Beis HaMikdash at the end of the second Beis HaMikdash period, they would try to do away with that. And Rabbinic Judaism, not only did we keep to it, but we celebrated it. And those massive celebrations on Sukkot, Chol HaMoed Sukkot of Simchas Beis HaShoeva, was all done to make this incredible party with torches and juggling and all that and dancing and orchestra. Why? To celebrate Torah Shebaal Peh. And we gave 1/3 example of where that came up, and that is the idea of having hot food on Shabbos. A literal reading of the Torah, they took it to mean, Lo sevaru eish b'chol moshvosechem, that come Shabbos, you have to extinguish all flames before Shabbos begins, which would mean you can't enjoy There's no way to have hot food Shabbos morning, because if you extinguished all your flames before Shabbos began, no matter how well you insulated your food, it's not going to be hot Shabbos morning. So we have our rabbinic tradition that says, no, lo sivaru eish b'chol moshe just means I'm not allowed to light fire on Shabbos. But if it was lit before, I could enjoy it. So therefore, to celebrate Torah Shabbat, that's why we make a point of having and enjoying hot food on Shabbos day. So again, these are responses to the threats and the accusations that were made against traditional rabbinic Judaism by the Tzedukim, by the Sadducees. So we've already seen that. What I want to share with you this morning is show you another massive fight that existed between the Tzedukim and the Pirushim. The Pirushim literally means those who were parush, those who, so to say, were set aside or more sanctified. Some could have said it meant perush because they provided interpretation to the psukim. Whatever it was, that's always the term that's used to refer to standard rabbinic Judaism. So we're going to show Parshiyos Acharei Mos, which deals with the service on Yom Kippur. We're going to show another massive machlokas that raged at the time of the second Beis Hamikdash between the Tzedukim and standard rabbinic Judaism about how to perform one specific aspect of the avoda that was unique to Yom Kippur. So let's see what that was. So Parshas Acharei Mos begins, and that's what we've got here on the top. It's in Vayikra, it's Perek Tes Zayin, so chapter 16. It says, Vayidaber Hashem al Moshe Acharei Mos Shnei Bnei Aaron, that God is now speaking to Moshe after the two children of Aaron died, because some of Bnei Hashem Ve'emusu, when they brought that unauthorized a fire offering of Ketores at the inauguration of Mishkan, and they died. After that whole incident, this is when now this following set of instructions is given to Moshe about how to perform the Avodah on Yom Kippur. Vayomer Hashem al Moshe, Daber al Aaron achicha. This is what you need to tell your brother Aaron. Al yavo b'chol eis el hakodesh mi beis laparoches. That he should not come at all times into the holy within the dividing curtain. That means in the Kodesh, in the Oel Moed, first in the Mishkan, and then later the Heichal, the sanctuary, you might say, within the Beis Hamikdash. We know it was divided into two parts. There was a Kodesh, and then you had the Parochet, you had the curtain, and then there was the Kodesh HaKadoshim, the Holy of Holies. In the Holy of Holies, all that was there was the Aron Kodesh, that special ark that contained the Luchos Habris. So he's telling Aaron that you should never go into the Kodesh mi beis laparoches, meaning if you're already in the let's say in the Mishkan, you're in the Ol Moed, and in the Beis Hamikdash, the future Kohen Gadol, when he's in the Heichal, he should never leave the Kodesh section, go through the Paroches, the curtain, to go into the Holy of Holies where the Aron Kodesh is. El Panei Kaporas, in front of the cover, Asher al Aaron, that's on the top of the Aaron, V'lo Yamus, so he shouldn't die. Meaning throughout the years, 364 days a year, no Kohen Gadol, nobody had a right to enter into the Kodesh HaKadoshim. Now he adds one qualification, Ki ba'anon era ela kaporas. And he says, why? Because I appear over the ark cover in a cloud, so no one's ever supposed to go in there. Okay. Now, there is one exception, and that's on Yom Kippur. There was one part of the avoda that would take place on Yom Kippur, lifnayu lifnim, in the innermost sanctum of the Beis Hamikdash, first in the Mishkan, in the Kodesh HaKadoshim, and that had to do with the Ketores. Normally, the Ketores, that incense offering, was always brought on the golden Mizbeach, the golden on Mizbeach Hazav, that was in the Kodesh section. That was in the first section of the Ol Moed, and later in the Heichal. On Yom Kippur, there was one point in the avoda, and we'll soon see it was a very complicated procedure how they did this. The Kohen Gadol would take in one hand, you can kind of see in that diagram, I got this from Machon HaMikdash, that's the Temple Institute in the Old City in Yerushalayim. So you'll see towards the front of the picture, there's a golden, it looks like a golden chalice, it's a golden container that would hold 2 handfuls of ketores. It would be different for every Kohen Gadol, because depending on how much everyone's size of their hands are different. So it would be pre-measured out. 2 exact handfuls of ketores would be in that golden vessel. And then he had a fire pan, it looks like a shovel, that had coals on it. So it was very complicated. He would come through the curtain. He would be holding in his right hand, he would have the fire pan. In the left hand, he would have that golden chalice that's got the 2 handfuls of ketores in there. He would put the fire pan down on the floor, right in between the 2 poles of the Aron, and then in a very complicated procedure, he could not put that chalice down, that golden item that had the 2 handfuls of ketores. So he would hold it in his hands, and he would kind of tilt it towards him using his back fingers in a way that would tilt it up that and nothing could drip out. He had to catch all of the two handfuls of ketoris that were in it and then put that down on the coals, which would make a incredible amount of smoke come up in the Kodesh HaKadoshim.
You're probably going to talk about why did it have to be exact the size of the Kohen Gadol's head?
Oh, so we'll see, because the pasuk basically says, I don't know if I have the pasuk here that says it. Yeah, we'll see it here. It's based on a pasuk here. So let's see. So pasuk Yud Beis and Yud Gimel talk about this. It says v'lakach, and again the Gemara tells us that he practiced this for days in advance because this was very complex. And again, if any of the ketoris would have dripped out and not been in his hands, it would have been a flaw. Because we're going to see in a pasuk here, he's got to have two handfuls of ketoras to put down on the shovel. So if something would have dripped out in that process and fell on the floor, he wouldn't have it. So it's got to be exact, and he really trained for this. So it says v'lakach. This is now when he goes into the Kodesh HaKadoshim. V'lakach malo b'hamachtar gach le'esh. He should have a pan like this golden shovel that's filled with burning coals, me'al mizbeach, that he took from the mizbeach mefnei Hashem. Umelo chafnav. This is the two words that this is all based on. Melo chafnav means in two full hands, ketoras samim daka, of finely ground incense. Vehevi mi beis laparochas, and he's going to bring these items, the fire pan with the coals and that golden bowl that's got the two handfuls of ketoras. That's what he's going to walk into the Kodesh HaKadoshim with. Then he first puts down the fire pan on the ground before the ark, and while those coals are burning, the pasuk doesn't tell us. We have this all the Mesorah Torah Sheba'al Peh. He has to transfer the contents of that golden bowl into his hands, which again was a very complex procedure. How to tilt it up and get all the stuff out without any of it falling out. And now he takes those two hands full of ketoras and he lets that down on the coals. It says v'nosanas haketoras aleish lefnei Hashem, and then he would let that down on the fire on the coals before God. And now what would happen was that would produce this incredible amount of smoke, and that cloud of smoke from the ketoras would cover esakaporas, would envelop and would cover the top, the covering of the aron of the ark, asher ala yedus v'lo yamus, and that would cover up, and he's got to do this all perfectly v'lo yamus, so that he should not die. That's what the pasuk tells us. Now again, I offered some of the Torah Sheba'al Peh explanation of that. But again, these are the psukim that's all based on, those two psukim that talk about this. And again, it's supposed to be a very complex procedure. Let's go to page 2. Page 2 is going to tell us more of the background of that. And again, that illustration that I have there from Machon HaMikdash, you go on their website, they've had artists paint and depict so many parts of the Avodah and Yom Kippur. It really brings it to life. It's beautiful in the color. This really doesn't do it justice, but you go on their website. It's called, you see it there, the address, there's Temple Institute, and you go on the instance, there's like a 5-part thing where they go through all the times of the year where Ketoris was brought. So let's go to page 2. So page 2 is going to bring us to the Mishnah in Yoma. The tractate of Mishnah that discusses the Avodah and Yom Kippur is Yoma. Yoma means the day. So the day that was such a special day in the Beis HaMikdash was Yom Kippur. So there's a very famous Mishnah at the beginning. It's the 5th Mishnah, the first parak. It says, Masru ziknei beis din ziknei kahuna. So this is talking about all the preparations that the Kohen Gadol would do leading up to, in the days in leading up to Yom Kippur. So it says, after the ziknei beis din, the elders of the beis din got done prepping him and working with the Kohen Gadol, they would hand him off to the elder Kohanim. They would take him to a section in the Beis HaMikdash, the upper chambers of the Avtinas room. The Avtinas family of Kohanim, they were the ones who made the Ketores. So this would have been in the part, like in the rooms that was designated for Ketores. And they would make him take an oath. Doesn't tell us much about that oath, but the Mishnah says they would make him take an oath. V'niftaru, then they would separate from one another. V'alchulahem, those elder Kohanim would go on their way, and they would separate. So v'amrulo, here's what they would say when he took this oath. V'amrulo, they would say to him, Ishi Kohen Gadol, my master, the Kohen Gadol, Anu shluchei beis din, we are the agents of beis din of the Sanhedrin. V'ata, and you, Kohen Gadol, shluchenu, you are our agent. our messenger, Ushliach Beis Din, and you are also the messenger of the Sanhedrin, and really, for that matter, all of Am Yisrael. Mashbin anu alecha, we want you to take the following oath. B'misha shichin shemo b'bayis hazeh, in the name of He, meaning God, who dwells in this house, shelo tishaneh davar mikol ma she'amarnu lach. Promise us right here, right now, you will not deviate from all the instructions we gave you about the precise details of how to do the avoda on Yom Kippur. Hu Poresh Ubocha, after making this oath, taking the oath, he would separate himself and go his way, and he would cry, Vehin portion Ubochin. And then the elders of the Kohanim, they would also, or the elders of Beis Din, they would also separate and they would cry as well. That's our Mishnah. Comes along the Gemara, wants to understand this. What's everyone crying about? What's the oath about? Let's see. So the Gemara says as follows. So I just broke it up. It'll be easier to follow by breaking it into these paragraphs here. Hu pareshu bocha. It says that the Kohen Gadol separates and cries. Vehin portion bochan. And then the agents of Beis Din or the elder Kohanim, they also separate and cry. So hu pareshu bocha. Why does the Kohen Gadol cry? Shechashtu tzeduki. Why did they make him take this oath? Because they suspected we have to make sure you're not a tzedukah. They're crying. He's crying that it's come to this, that the Sadducees have infiltrated their way into the priesthood, into the Kohanim. That here it is, the holiest day of the year, where all of Am Yisrael is depending on me to do this right, and they're making me take this oath. Look how far we've fallen. That the tzedukim who reject rabbinic tradition of Judaism, they've infiltrated the ranks. So I'm crying that by the fact they're making me take this oath means I haven't escaped their suspicion. So he would cry. The Haim portion of Bochen, and then the agents of Beis Din would also cry. Damar Rabbi Yeshua and Levi, why would they cry? Because kol achoshed b'chsherim lo begufo. Because the idea is anybody who is choshed b'chsherim, or there's an extra copy. Anyone who is choshed b'chsherim, anyone who suspects someone who is really innocent, their body is stricken. So they're crying, saying, "We hope that." We're not going to be held to account in the heavenly level for this. We had to make him take this oath because it's unfortunately the state of the Jewish people has degenerated to the point where the Tzedukim have infiltrated the Beis HaMikdash. We feel terrible that it's come to this, and he feels terrible it's come to this. All parties are crying. That's how he explains this. Just parenthetically, total tangent. Years ago, I thought of this. People every now and then contact shuls who we have no idea who they are. They say, "I'm traveling through your region, and can you please find someone to put me up for Shabbos?" And when we still lived in Pennsylvania, it hit me within the first year or two. Is like, whoa, I have no idea who this person is. Like, for all I know, this guy's on the run from. So I don't know if this person's safe. And now I'm going to ask a total stranger, unsuspected. And I had heard stories. I remember once when we lived in Pennsylvania, someone told us they once had a case like this, and something was clearly off about the person. And they basically had a rotation. The husband and wife, and that's because they had kids in the house. They basically stayed up all night. They had a chair outside in the hallway where they were basically doing shmirah. They were on guard duty. They didn't know what the story is. They wanted to make sure no phony business was going on. So after I heard that, I said, "Look, what am I doing?" So I started a very simple procedure. Someone would reach out. I would basically say, "Hey, I want to understand why you're coming to town, get a little more information," and then just say, "Do you have a rabbinic reference you can give me?" And I would reach out to the rabbi, and I had a pretty standard email that I would send, and I continue to do this to this day. And I thought of this mission. I say, "That's exactly. I'm so sad it's come to this." And I'm sure this person said it's come to this too, but at a certain point you got to acknowledge the reality. It says here that the shluchei Beis Din would cry because it's come to this, and the Kohen Gadol would cry because it's come to this. But it's come to this. There's too many stories that are out there, and it's not such a difficult thing to do. If someone can't give you a rabbinic reference, yeah, 100%. That's what I'm saying. And if someone gets all bent out of shape that I'm so offended that that's the warning bells right there. Like, well, what's wrong with you that you can't, or you don't have anybody in your life who you could give me as a rabbinic reference? They're like, okay, like something's a little off there,
Okay, so we lived in places. We lived in Tucson.
Yeah.
We lived in Las Vegas.
Yeah.
There are people coming through those two places all the time.
Yeah.
And when we were in Tucson, it was, my gosh, it was over 40 years ago.
Yeah.
And there was a guy who contacted Rabbi Winter, Winter's his wife's thing, Becker.
Yeah.
And we said, okay, we can put him up.
Yeah.
And at that time, I put the way I put him up, he actually shared a room with my kids,
Uh-oh.
right? Because I had an extra bed, but not an extra room.
Right.
And there was something a little bit off about this guy.
Yeah.
Right, but he got up in the morning and he left, and he came home around 6 o'clock. And he says, I see the house across the street is for sale, I think I'm gonna look at it and see if I can, all right, whatever. Anyway, Rabbi Becker got a phone call about this person.
Yeah.
He is a homeless guy that goes from place to place to place.
Right.
He said, Jerry, you have to get rid of him immediately.
Right.
Get him out of your house.
Right. So I'm glad someone tipped him off, and that's not Lashon Hara. That is honestly trying to protect the public. That's what it's.
Oh my God! I have him sleeping with my children.
Right.
Right. So after that experience,
you also wisened up.
Oh, yeah. Yes.
Yeah, 100%. So that's my policy now, and I'm shocked. I want you to know, years ago, I wrote about this. In it was actually Yom Kippur. A businessman had reached out to us, and I believe he was from South Africa. And again, like I just asked for his rabbinic reverence and gave me his rabbi in South Africa. It was a quick conversation. He showed me, this guy's a wonderful, wonderful person. He just has to be in business, can't make it back. Perfect. We put him up. He was a wonderful guest. I remember he had the pre-fast meal with us. He had the breakfast meal. Wonderful, wonderful guy. And it just made me realize this. I wrote an article about this. OU published in their Jewish Action magazine. And it was basically just saying, like, we got to wisen up about this stuff. There's a lot of unstable people out there. We got to and this is not such a big deal. And I'm telling you, you would be shocked how much kickback I got. First of all, they printed a couple letters in the next issue of people, lambasting me, saying, "I can't believe one of the hallmarks of Klal Yisrael is Achnasas Orchim, and you're trying to put an end to that." And so one of these guys was a psychologist. He hasn't seen enough people with problems or heard enough of things. I was shocked. I had educators who were doing this, different people who were boasting about how many people they've had come through their home. And they asked me, do you want to respond? And that was aside from the personal emails that I got, people lambasting me. I was just shocked. And I wrote back, I said, listen, I do Bikur Cholim all the time. I'm a rabbi, I go to hospitals to see people. Standard procedure is before you go into a patient's room, you Purell. And when you're done, you Purell, you put on, if you need to, you put on a mask, whatever it is. I said, I'm doing the mitzvah, but I'm doing it carefully. I'm not ending Bikur Cholim, but you got to be careful. You protect yourself, you protect the patient. So I'm not ending Achnasas Orchim. Just be smart about it. For the life of me, I couldn't get over the fact that there was kickback. Like I'd like to think that by now, that wouldn't get any kickback. But again, I don't know. It happens to be a lot of times over the years. I'm so sorry for going on this tangent, but it happens to be a lot of the years when I do reach out to rabbis. How many of them said to me, "What a good idea! I don't know why I never do that." I'm telling you, it's such a seichel thing to do. I don't know. It's not a. It's. Anyhow, but anyhow, this is what when I wrote that article, this is what I came to. I said, this is such a famous Mishnah, and this is exactly what it is. He cries, and the Beis Din cries. And that's what I'm so sorry it's come to this, but this is what we got to do. We got to just do some degree of just background check, if you want to call it that. Okay, I'm so sorry. All right, back to our Gemara. So our Gemara says that they would make him take this. The Mishnah rather said it. He took a shavua, and then the Gemara just explained it. So now the Gemara, I'm on that second, where I made it the second paragraph. Kol kach lama. Why were they making him take this shavua? So it says, why? Shelo yitaken mi b'chutz v'yachnis, that he shouldn't first, remember, no one was watching him. Once he goes into the Kodesh section, where the golden altar is, and then the menorah is, no one went in with him. He went in by himself. So no one would watch him as he then walked into the Kodesh HaKadoshim. So they wanted to make sure, we want your assurance that you're going to follow Rabbinic Judaism's Masorah, our tradition, how this is to be done, that basically you don't mix the Ketoras with the fire pan until you're in front of the Aron. What did the Tzedukim do? They said, we're taking a literal reading, and we'll soon see what their reading was based on. And they said, no, mix it while you're still by the golden mizbeach in the first room with the golden mizbeach and the menorah. Mix it in there and go into the Kodesh HaKadoshim with the fire pan already producing smoke from the incense. So that's what he says. Kol kach lama. Why did they make him go through this process of taking the shavua? Shelo yitaken mi bachutz because they didn't want him to arrange everything, meaning mix the incense, the ketoras with the coals, mibuchutz, in the first room. It's called that outside, the yachnis, and then go into the inner chamber, the Kodesh HaKadoshim. Who did that? Kederach shat tzedukim osen. That was the manner in which the tzedukim would do it. Okay, what? Why did the tzedukim do it that way? We'll soon see in the next paragraph. Tanu Rabbanan says our rabbis taught. We have a brayso that taught as follows: Ma'aser b'tzeduki echad. An incident happened with a tzeduki who did infiltrate the ranks of the Kohanim and made it to be a Kohen Gadol. Shehiskin mibachutz v'echnis. He was serving one Yom Kippur as a Kohen Gadol, and he actually did it this way. He mixed the ketoras with the coals in the first room, in the Kodesh section, and then he brought it into Kodesh HaKadoshim. So and no one knew about it because he no one was with him. So when he came out, he was smiling from ear to ear about what he had done, how he had outsmarted the system, and how he had beat Rabbinic Judaism, and he had done the ritual as a tzeduki would do it, as they think it should be done. Pagabo Aviv, his dad stops him. Amarlo, and he says to him, Beni, he says, wipe that smile off your face. You're giving yourself away. Afal Pisha Tzedukin Anu, even though we're a family of Tzedukin, come on, be wise about this. Misyarin Anu Mina Perushim. We got to be careful. There's Perushim, meaning there are standard rabbinic Judaism out there. This is who in the New Testament they call the Pharisees. So it says the Perushim are out there, and they don't like what we're doing. So you're grinning from ear to ear. You're giving yourself away. That's not wise. Come on, have some seichel. So Amarlo, so the son who was the Kohen Gadol who had infiltrated, Amarlo, he says to his father, this almost sounds like Rabbi Akiva, says, Kol Yamai Hayisi Mitzter, my entire life I was always bothered Ala Mikra Azeh, about a certain pasuk. Remember Rabbi Akiva, before he died, his students asked him, how can you be smiling? You're being tortured by the Romans. And he says, all my life I was so bothered about how can I fulfill, I say every day in Kriya Shema, Kol Nafshecha, with all your life, and now I finally have a chance to do it. This is like the inverse of this. This Tzeduki says, Kol Yamai, my entire life, Hayisi Mitztair Ala Mikra Azeh. I was always bothered about this pasuk that's at the beginning of this week's Parsha, Acharei Mos. The pasuk says, Ki ba'anan era'eh al kapores. God tells Moshe, tell Aaron throughout the rest of the year, don't go into the Kodesh HaKadoshim, because that's where my cloud descends on the kapores. The Tzedukim read this and said, when does God's presence reside there? If you go in producing a cloud on the kapor, meaning the cloud, the incense needs to be smoking, needs to be producing smoke before you go in there. That's how the Tzedukim wanted to read it. So he says, my whole life I've been taught, I've been educated to read that pasuk in a very literal sense, that like the Tzeduki fashion. Amarti, so I said to myself, when will I have the opportunity to fulfill this? This is my Tzeduki dream. Now that it's come my way, I shouldn't fulfill it. How could I not be happy? This has been a lifelong dream of mine. That's what he's telling his dad. Some kids dream about going to, the big game, the big concert. I've always been dreaming, when can I serve as a Kohen Gadol according to Tzeduki fashion? How could I not be skipping? How could I not be smiling from ear to ear? That's what he tells his father. Amru, the sages said, here was a tradition. What ended up happening with this guy? Lohayu yamim muatim, not very few days went by, ad shemes, until this guy just dropped dead, seemingly like he was a heavenly punishment. V'hutal ba'ashpa, whatever the circumstances were, his corpse ended up in the garbage dump. So I don't know what that means. He was taken out the trash and he just dropped dead. Whatever it was, the Kohen Gadol, who was the high member of society, he just dropped dead and his corpse was lying in the garbage dump. The first opinion was everyone saw that some heavenly retribution was taking place because they saw worms coming out of his nose. The Yeshomrim and others say, no, so when he left the Beis HaMikdash, nigaf, that's when he was struck down. It wasn't days later, he was struck down pretty quickly. The Tani Reb Chia taught, Kimin kol nishma bazara, that all the Jews who were in the courtyard, they heard this incredible sound, Sheba malach v'chavato al panav. An angel had come and had beaten him in his face. V'nichnasu echav kohanim. The other kohanim went in to go retrieve his body, and because in other words, he was struck down in the heichal. Umatsu, and what did they find? Bekaf regel egel ben ksefav. Imprinted between his two shoulders was like the hoof print of an egel, of a calf. Shenemar, He quotes a pasuk from Yecheskel that describes the way the feet of angels look. Ragleim, what Yecheskel in his vision of seeing the Merkava, God's heavenly chariot, it said Ragleim regel yishara. They have straight legs, meaning their legs don't bend, they don't have knees. The kaf ragleim, the soles of their feet, kekaf regel egel, are like split hooves of a calf. Very cryptic Gemara. So again, so what we clearly see is there was a fight between the Tzedukim and the Perushim. How do you do this avoda? The Tzedukim did it one way. The Perushim said, no, that's not our Masorah, that's not our tradition, and therefore we're going to do it as Moshe taught it to us. And that's the reason, that's the explanation why the Mishnah says they made him take the oath and why they were all crying together. And then the Gemara brings down this incident of a Tzeduki who did infiltrate the ranks, made it up there, did the avoda according to Tzeduki teachings, and he met a heavenly fate. Either it was days later and his corpse was in the trash and they saw worms coming out of his nose, or it was quite immediate. He was struck and down. The other Kohanim had to go retrieve him, and they saw the imprint of a cat foot in between his shoulders. Kind of cryptic. So we're going to see Rav Sorotzkin. I saw Rav Sorotzkin in his Oznaim LaTorah. He says, I want to explain that Gemara. What are those two opinions and how do we explain them? Why the sages arguing about which form of a heavenly death did this person experience? How do we make sense of this? So let's see. I thought this was fascinating what he does here. So he says in this Oznaim LaTorah, V'nasanas haktoras ala eish lifnei Hashem. So it says Dvarim Berurim. So it says the matter is clear. So again, this just to tell, this is the pasuk telling us Yud Gimel that the rabbinic Judaism way of doing this was that once he's in the Kodesh Kedoshim, he puts down the fire pan that has the coals, and then he puts the 2 handfuls of the ketores onto it, producing the smoke. Don't do it in the previous room. That's the Tzeduki way. Rabbinic Judaism waits until we're in there. Okay, he says Dvarim Berurim. The matter is clear. According to rabbinic Judaism, the ketores needs to be put on the coals lifnei Hashem, before God. What does that mean? Only after the Kohen Gadol has brought the fire pan and the stuff from the first room beyond the ketores into the room where only the aron is, that's called lifnei Hashem. Only then should he mix the ketores on the coals. In spite of that this is our rabbinic tradition, and that seems to be a clear reading of the pasuk. The Tzedukim were around at the end of the second Beis Hamikdash. They found a false reading of this. They came up with what they perceived as being a more literal reading of the Torah, which was all an effort on their part to just be mevatel, to just do away with our entire rabbinic tradition. He says the Tzedukim really, what their entire goal was to do away with Torah Shebal Peh, a Masorah. So whenever they got a chance to say, oh, we're going to read those psukim different, they would do it. And here was one. V'amru, and what did they say? That you needed to, the Kohen Gadol needed to put the ketores, the incense spices, on the fiery coals before he goes into Kodesh HaKodashim while he's still in the first room in the Ol Moed. V'lavo beis laparochas im. What does that say? Im. I can't read with it. Im. There's something missing in there. Okay, whatever. Im haketoras. In other words, maybe it's Aish. No, it's not Aish. Okay, so in other words, it says he's got what they wanted to read it was that he puts the ketoras on the coals. Oh, anan haketoras. That he puts the spices on the coals. It starts to produce a cloud of smoke, and then he goes into the Kodesh HaKodashim with a cloud of smoke of the ketoras. And again, what's that based on? The first pasuk, the second pasuk in the parsha, that it said as follows. It goes kiba anan ere al kaporas. Remember, the way that Tzeduki wanted to read it was that the only way God's presence will be there is if a cloud of smoke is there as you come in. So that's how they came up with their reading of it, this false reading of it. Since nobody was allowed to be there, the pasuk is very clear that no one is allowed to be there but the Kohen Gadol, so therefore no one could actually keep an eye and keep tabs on what he was doing. That's why the Mishnah tells us in Yoma that they would make him take this oath, that he's not going to do this in the Tzeduki manner. And the Gemara in Yuma tells us about this incident that we just read together. That he arranged the Ketores on the coals outside, and then he went into the Kodesh HaKodashim. Amru, and the sages said, it wasn't not only just a couple of days went by till he suddenly dropped dead. His corpse was left in the garbage dump. And there were worms coming out of his nose. There was a second opinion that said, no. He was struck down right away. As soon as he left the Kodesh HaKodashim and he was in the first section, that's when everyone heard this massive strike, like a thunderclap. He was struck down, and other Kohanim had to retrieve his body. An angel came and smashed him in the face. Umatsu, and when they, I guess, when the Chevra Kadisha was working on him, when they undressed him and they were washing him, Umatsu kaf regel egel ben ksefav. They found imprinted in between his shoulders was like the hoof print of an egel, of a calf. That's the Gemara. So he says, how do we make sense of this? Venira, he says, here's how I explain this. Venira, it appears she'enenash b'chotma. According to the opinion that says he was struck down days later and they found his corpse and there was worms coming out of the nose. How do you explain that? Because the Ketores smelled delicious and he did it early. He jumped the gun. So he was enjoying the smell of the Ketores too early, before he went in and did it lifnei Hashem, before he did it lifnei lifnim in the inner sanctum, before he did it in the outer room, and thus he started smelling it before, so to say, God smelled it. He enjoyed the Ketores before Hashem did. That's that opinion. Why would they say the first opinion that he was punished in such a fashion that they saw something involving the nose? That was to give the message to Klal Yisrael what this guy did wrong. Someone who, I guess, puts their own bodily needs before the needs of God. Alava Kasav Omer, he quotes the pasuk from Malachim that says, "V'osi hishlachta acharei gavcha." You've thrown me behind your corpse. That's why this guy was cast into the garbage heap. Because again, what did that pasuk say? If a human puts their bodily needs before God, look at the expression. Vosi hishlachta. You have cast me. You've like thrown me away. So it's like mita keneged mita. This guy was thrown away. He's in the trash. Shareach reach ra, that has a bad smell, umos tachas hareach hatov, and he's being punished by being amongst this terrible smell, mita keneged mita, for all the good smell of the Ketorah shenana biser that he enjoyed in a forbidden fashion. So he says that's the first opinion, because he wants to explain the mita keneged mita of each opinion. According to the first opinion, that's how he died. He was in a garbage heap and worms coming out of the nose. That's the mita keneged mita. What's the mita keneged mita of getting struck down and getting the imprint of a calf foot? He says, Ulahayesh Omram, according to the second opinion, Shemalach Chavto, that an angel struck him down. Umatzo kekaf regel egel ben ksefav, and they found the imprint of a calf in between his shoulders. So he says, Efshir Lomar Atam Bazeh, it's possible to explain it this way. Shat Sadukim Choshvim, what did the Sadukim believe? When they had this whole philosophy that led them to believe that you've got to first do the Ketores before you go in there. It says Shat Tzedukim Choshvim, the Tzedukim thought She'ena Shechina Nimtzas Tamid beBeis Hamikdash. God's presence is not always in the Beis Hamikdash. Rak ba'anan ere al kaporos, like the second pasuk in this week's parsha says. B'shasha Kohen Gadol ba ima Ketores al Kodesh Hadashim. If the Kohen Gadol enters with a cloud of Ketores, only then will God's presence be found there. But the truth of the matter is that's not true. The Torah is telling us God's presence is always there. In other words, the Tzedukim were of the belief we have to do something to bring God's presence down. But that's not true. God's presence is always there. And the Tzedukim philosophy was, no, we have to do something to make His presence be there. And this is alluded to the fact that God's presence is always there. What Moshe told Binyamin in Parshiyos Acharei Mos, it says, "Uven kseifav shachen." It says, and between the shoulders, that's where God rests. Rashi quotes, what is the shoulders? I mean, that's the Harei Yerushalayim. If you look at the mountains of Yerushalayim, it's like the shoulder blades. Imagine someone's laying down on their stomach. You see those two protruding shoulder blades. In between them, that is the Makom HaMikdash. That's where God says, Beik Seifav, in between the shoulders, Shachain, that's where God's presence dwells. This Tzeduki who didn't believe that God's presence is always there, he didn't believe that it was always there between the shoulders, between the hills of Jerusalem, the Beis HaMikdash and the Beis HaMikdash. Nifka ben Ksefav. That's why he was specifically, the mark was left specifically of all the places of the body. Where was he? Where was it made clear? Ben Ksefav, between his shoulders. So that's a fascinating theory. What Rav Sorotsky is saying to explain his Gemara. We need to say that there's Mida Keneged Mida, and there was a message being sent for Klal Yisrael to figure out what this fellow did wrong. So now he's suggesting that according to both opinions of the Gemara, you can extrapolate what the person did wrong. I thought that was very interesting. Okay, but again, this just brings alive what was going on in the time of the second Beis HaMikdash. What was going on, and just in terms of the fights, we all know that there was a schism of the Tzaddikim, but there was this ongoing battle for Torah Shebaal Peh, and this is just one example of it. How this played itself out. We've got a couple minutes left. I want to share with you one more that this is absolutely beautiful. What you'll find here, we're on page 3 now. After going through everything involving Yom Kippur, the next parak in Acharei Mos, Parak Yud Zayin, deals with what's called Shchutei Chutz. Shchutei Chutz means slaughtering and burning items, korbanos, outside the Beis HaMikdash. We are prohibited from doing that. Once the Beis HaMikdash is around, then there's no shchutei chutz. We can't set up a backyard altar. That's called a bama. This is something that was going on throughout Nevi'im, that they were trying to put an end to this practice. Bnei Israel had a really hard time giving this up, and that's what's going on. So the parsha of shchutei chutz is in Yud Zayin. So I just brought the psukim there that talk this out. You'll see in those psukim where it says that Hashem tells Moshe, let everyone know once the Mishkan is set up, once the Beis HaMikdash is set up, you're not allowed to bring any korbanos, shech them, you're not allowed to burn them outside of the confines of the Beis HaMikdash. Let's see what Rav Sorotsky does here. He wants to say, what's the juxtaposition? Why right after telling me all the laws of Yom Kippur, does Hashem feel the need to tell Moshe, make sure Bnei Israel understand the prohibition of shchutei chutz? And this is awesome. Look what he does here. Daber al Aaron ve'al banav ve'al kol Bnei Israel. Lama nismacha parsha shchutei chutz v'ha'alas karban b'chutz leparshas Yom Kippur. Why does the Torah specifically? It can't be accidental. The juxtaposition must be intentional. Why did the Torah place this here right after teaching about Yom Kippur? V'lama herich lomar. Why does it go on to say very wordy? Daber al Aaron ve'al banav ve'al kol Bnei Israel. Make sure Aaron hears this. Make sure his kids hear this. Make sure all Bnei Israel hears this. Why doesn't it just say simple? Daber Bnei Israel. Everyone's included. It sounds like you're really trying to emphasize the point here. Yesh Lomar Lafi. What's the explanation? He suggests Rav Sorotsky. Lafi Sheshamu Bnei Israel b'Parshas Yom Kippur. When Bnei Israel heard all the instructions of Yom Kippur, two details jumped out at them. Shakapara ba beikar. Most of the atonement that comes to Bnei Israel on Yom Kippur, a lot of that involved stuff that went on outside the Beis HaMikdash. Alidei parachatas asher la'aronu uveso. The Kohen Gadol had to bring a bull that was slaughtered in the Beis HaMikdash, but it was going to be burnt outside the Beis HaMikdash. Chutz ha'machaneh, outside the Beis HaMikdash. And he says, what else went on? Shnei sirei achatas meis adas bnei Israel. So you had the bull that was representing kapara for Aaron and all the Kohanim, and then you had those two he-goats that one was going to be slaughtered and burnt in Beis HaMikdash. Where did the other one end up? Cast off a cliff. Was that cliff in the Beis HaMikdash? No, and that plays an integral role in the kapara process. So here's Bnei Israel here in all they know how important Yom Kippur is. That's the one day of the year we could attain kapara. And two integral parts of that are going on outside the Beis HaMikdash. Shemakdishin Hashem kakarbanos. By the two he-goats, both of them are designated as karbanos. One is it's death, it's shechting, and it's thrown, it's outside the camp. Betur doron. Okay. Vasheni, second column. Vasheni shchitaso amnam b'kodesh. Okay, the second one is slaughtered in the Beis HaMikdash. But it's going to be burnt outside. Okay, V'hu hadavar b'streifas paroshal Aaron. So in other words, even the second he-goat, even though it's shechted in the Beis Hamikdash, it's going to be burnt outside the Beis Hamikdash, and the par of Aaron is also going to be burnt outside the Beis Hamikdash. V'achrei kol ela, and after both of those, Yomru Aaron uvanav v'chol b'nei Yisrael shekarbanos misug ela hema yosem merutzim l'fnei Hashem misugon tamid l'chaper avon. So Bnei Yisrael hears this, they say, "Whoa, Yom Kippur is our day. That's our day of kapara, real atonement." And what's integral to that? We've got a couple of things all taking place outside the Beis Hamikdash. You have the Sir Azazel that's thrown off a cliff outside. You have the other seer that's shechted inside, but it's burnt outside. And you have the par of Aaron, the bull of Aaron, that's shechted inside, but it's also burnt outside. And those are so important in Shiva Kapara. It must be there's something to it. There's like a secret ingredient here. There's a secret formula. If you really want to attain Kapara, do something outside the Beis Hamikdash. So he says, the Aktishu Karbanos. So what was the fear that Bnei Yisrael is going to say, I need that at some other point in the year. I did something wrong. I need kapara. Yaktishu Karbanos. They'll make their animals into karbanos. V'shachtu osam b'chutz. Or yishchatu bazara. Either they'll shech them outside like that Seir Lazazel, kill it outside and do everything outside, or they'll shech it inside. V'yisrafu yalo osam b'chutz. And then they'll burn them outside. Lefichach. Therefore nismacha azhara shchita. Parshiyos Yom Kippur. Therefore, the Torah specifically right here, right after telling you all the laws of Yom Kippur, Hashem tells Moshe, now make sure Bnei Yisrael know that this is the exception to the rule. No other point in the year will any korban be brought as a shechted or burnt outside the Beis Hamikdash. And that's why it specifically emphasizes anybody who achieved kapara on Yom Kippur. That's why it says to make sure Aaron hears this, make sure Banav, all the Kohanim hear this, make sure Bnei Yisrael hears this, make sure the message gets out there clearly that this is the exception to the rule. No other time does this happen. Now, I thought what's so astonishing about that, and this totally it's to me, and I'll tell you why in a minute, is that what's Sorotzkin saying? Klal Yisrael is experiencing Yom Kippur, and they know Yom Kippur works, but they need to be told, they need to be emphasized. Don't do this at home. Don't try this at home. This is something that stays here. Well, just explain to them. What do you mean? This is here. People really need to wake up. You can almost till you're blue in the face. You can say this is just for Yom Kippur, but it's not going to work. As soon as, and you see this in the classroom, as soon as kids see you made an exception to the rule, right away, every kid's going to say, well, why doesn't that apply to me? And I can explain, you're different, she's different, he's different, whatever it is. You got to really make that point strong. As soon as anybody spots an exception, the first thought is, well, how do I fit into that exception as well? And that's why he's saying the parsha needs to be told right here. Make the point as strong as possible that this is just for Yom Kippur. We're not going to have time to do it, but I want to tell you on the second side, this is something we're all familiar with, the incident that occurred about how Eliyahu confronts all the Nevi'ei Habal, the false prophets of Baal, at Har Carmel, and he sets up this whole showdown, and he says, okay, you spend your whole day chanting everything you need to do, and I want to see the flames descend from heaven from your false gods, and wow, nothing happened. He mocks them, and then he says he prepares an animal, and he says, let's soak it with water, let's pour more water, and then he asks Hashem, send down your flames, and boom, this fire comes down from heaven, and it burns everything up, including all the water that was spilled there. The Meshech Chachma, so this is Ramir Simcha of Devinsk, he has an astounding observation here. He says he has a question. He wants to know, why was it throughout the Nevi'im and throughout the Malachim, we had some really good kings in Klal Yisrael. How is it that even these really, really good kings, the Navi tells us several times, they accomplished everything, but they just could never get rid of the bamos. Bamos were like the backyard altars that people may have built. Why were they unsuccessful? They accomplished getting rid of Avodah Zarah. Why could they not root that out? And you know what he says? His theory is, after Bnei Yisrael witnessed what happened with Eliyahu Navi and Har Carmel, that was outside of the Mishkan. That was outside of the Beis Hamikdash. That was outside of where Korban should. If it's okay for Eliyahu, it's okay for me too. Exactly. So why don't people understand? Hey, that's Eliyahu. Those are exceptional circumstances. As soon as an exception is made, then what?
Why did you bring it into the Haftarah?
That's the Haftarah to Parshas Kisisa. So Kisisa is when the Klal Yisrael messes up with the Egel. So the Haftarah that week is the story of Eliyahu and Har Carmel.
So brought it in terms of comparison.
It's the same idea. Is that once people see an exception, then all of a sudden people say, "Oh, that's good for me too," and they really need to be emphasized to them that no, that's an exception.
understand how that Kohen Gadol, that was Saduki, got in the first place. I thought it was so carefully vetted.
Well, there were times when the Tzedukim were in charge.
So
The
because
the whole kahuna
that's the
became
tradition.
corrupted. Yeah, there was a period of time where the whole kahuna got. Remember, there was foreign overlords who were in charge, and they would appoint a different family of kohanim, sell it to the highest bidder, whatever it could have
Is that
been.
what people
So,
refer to as the corrupt Kohanim?
yeah, at the
That's
end of the
what-
second Beis Hamikdash period, so there was times where the Tzedukim infiltrated, got in, and they had the power, and they
also, it's a
totally
given
changed their avoda
If
based on.
they did that process wrong, that the Kohen Gadol would die immediately.
Well,
So
again,
why
so
would
so that's
stop
what you saw in the Gemara about here. There's two opinions. One opinion was it happened several days later. According to that
him?
opinion,
No,
it's not an
I
instant.
understood.
So I'm saying, but
It seems like it would be a given that he. even
well, we
if
have
he
that
doesn't
tradition
die,
as
like,
rabbinic
if
Jews.
I-
The Tzedukим, they were of the opinion we're doing it right. It's not going to happen. They got an answer for everything. That guy had an aneurysm.
He divorced Judaism.
100%. Yeah.
It kind of makes me feel
It
fatalistic.
gets you, but I'll tell you this in terms of exceptions. I could tell you numerous things that happen all the time based on questions that I get that people come my way, and they'll find out from someone, oh, well, this person told me this, and I'll say, okay, well, there were some circumstances, over there, but that's yeah.
That's the important lesson of all of it.
Yeah, is that, and that's the thing. But it's also something for each and every one of us as a teacher, as a parent, whatever. As soon as whoever it is we're dealing with, the classroom, children, anyone, as soon as people spot an exception, the human reaction is to think, well, why don't I fit in there as well? And as an educator, as a parent, whoever it is, got to really spend time letting the message know this was an exception and this is not acceptable outside of this one confined set of circumstances, and that's that. So anyhow, so those are two different areas there. One illustrating this battle between Sudukim and Perushim, how it played itself out at second Beis Hamikdash, and second, this idea of how susceptible we are as humans that when we spot an exception to automatically jump in on that, and therefore how careful we have to be, both as people looking to apply it to ourselves, and also if we're in an educator, parent role, whatever that may be, to help explain to the others why that exception is an exception, for a really limited set of circumstances there. All right, I'm going to stop the recording. If anyone has anything they want to they want to share, please feel free to do so.
This is my daughter-in-law's mother, Hadassah. This is Beck. Hey, my husband is the one who they moved here to be in charge of the school. She didn't.